There are places on this earth, deep within the ancient, untamed wild, where the veil between the known and the utterly unknowable thins to a whisper, and what lurks beyond begins to seep through. I'm Elia's thorn, and for the better part of 20 years, the wilderness has been my sanctuary, my classroom, my relentless, beautiful mistress. I've trekked through more untrodden paths than most people have paved roads in their lives. I've faced down grizzlies, navigated treacherous blizzards, and slept under skies so vast and clear they felt like the very fabric of eternity. I was a guide, a survivalist, a man who believed every single mystery the wild threw at you had a logical, albeit sometimes brutal, explanation. But the Blackwood Mire, this sprawling, ancient reserve where I now served as head ranger, had other plans for my certainty. It started like any other late autumn day. The air carried that crisp, metallic scent of falling leaves and impending frost. A muted sunlight filtered through the skeletal branches of the ancient pines and gnarled cedars, casting shifting patterns on the forest floor, a tapestry of russet and gold. My partner, Lena Petrova, a brilliant young biologist fresh out of her field placement, walked beside me. She was all sharp angles and focused energy, her keen eyes constantly scanning the undergrowth for a rare fern or a unique lichen. Lena was a scientist through and through, devoted to observable facts and quantifiable data. I appreciated that. It balanced my own gut instinct approach to the woods. "Beautiful day, Elias," she'd remarked, pulling a small, battered field guide from her pack. Her voice, usually so bright, was a soft hum against the gentle rustle of the forest. The only sounds were the distant caw of a raven, the whisper of wind through the boughs, and the crunch of our boots on the frost-dusted earth. Tranquility, that's what it was. A deep, pervasive peace that settled into your bones. And then we saw it up ahead, where the ancient oaks grew thickest, their massive trunks scarred with centuries of storms, the tranquility shattered. The air here was different, heavy, stagnant, and cold. An unnatural cold that seemed to sink directly into the marrow, a chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. It clung to the air like a shroud, tightening its grip the closer we got. And with the cold came a smell. A cloying, metallic tang, like old blood mixed with something rotten and acrid, something chemical and utterly wrong. It clawed at the back of my throat, turning my stomach. Lena coughed, her hand instinctively going to her nose. "What is that smell?" she murmured, her voice tight with distaste. We pushed through a screen of dense ferns, and then it was before us. A clearing roughly circular, devoid of any natural undergrowth. The earth was disturbed, churned up, but not by a feeding animal, not by anything I'd ever seen. At its center lay what had once been a deer, a large buck by the look of it, but it wasn't merely a carcass. Oh no. This was a spectacle. Its body had been meticulously dissected, each piece arranged with an almost surgical precision. The hide, flayed perfectly, was laid out like a dark, macabre rug. The bones, ribcage, spine, limbs were not scattered haphazardly, as they would be after a predator's feast. Instead, they were meticulously arrayed, forming intricate spirals and geometric patterns that defied any known natural process. Tufts of fur were woven into the roots of nearby trees. The skull, stripped clean, sat upright on a small mound of earth, its empty eye sockets staring north, almost as if it were a sentinel. And the antlers, instead of being attached, were positioned just so, crossing each other to form a perfect X over the flayed hide. My camera was in my hand before I consciously thought to reach for it. Click, click, click. The lens whirred, documenting the grotesque tableau from every possible angle. Lena, her face pale, already had her notepad out, scribbling furiously, her hand trembling slightly. "Elias, look at this," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She held up a small, smooth bone no larger than my thumb. It was impossibly clean, almost polished. This isn't from the deer. This is definitely human." The words hung in the air, a bell tolling a slow, dreadful rhythm in my chest. My brows knitted, a knot of ice forming in my gut. Human. It was a single, devastating word. I said nothing, focusing on my camera, on the cold, hard mechanics of documentation, anything to keep my mind from spiraling into the implications of Lena's discovery. Each piece she carefully collected, bagging them individually, felt like a fragment of a nightmare. The usual forest sounds had evaporated, replaced by a profound, eerie silence that pressed down on us. And then, there it was again. The cold, the smell, but stronger now, and a feeling, a distinct primal sensation of being watched, not just observed but studied. My skin prickled with goosebumps. The hair on my forearm stood on end. "Lena," I said, my voice hoarse, "we need to go." "Now?" she nodded, her eyes wide, her face a mask of primal fear. We moved, not running, but a rapid, controlled retreat. The sun, once a comforting presence, now seemed to mock us, its dappled light doing little to dispel the shadows that seemed to lengthen and deepen with every step we took away from that clearing. As we hiked back towards the patrol vehicle, the western sky began to bleed into fiery oranges and bruised purples, the sun sinking below the jagged teeth of the distant peaks. The moon, a pale, nascent crescent, was already climbing in the east. What do you think that was?" Lena asked, her voice quiet, almost an echo in the gathering dusk. She swept her flashlight beam through the encroaching shadows, a nervous, almost frantic dance of light. That feeling of dread, of profound wrongness, clung to us like a second skin. "I don't know, Lena," I admitted, my own flashlight weaving an uneven path across the leaf-strewn ground. "But it wasn't an animal kill, not like anything I've ever seen. The arrangement, the precision." We walked in silence for a few long minutes, the only sound the crunch of our boots and the frantic beat of my own heart. "You think it was a ritual?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, though the thought had already burrowed its way deep into my mind. "Maybe, but who and why? Kids, maybe," she offered, though the question was laced with disbelief. "Or one of those weird cults," I scoffed, but the sound felt hollow even to my own ears. "This wasn't a prank, Lena. Or some amateur cult. The cold, the smell, and that bone. The human bone. I still couldn't quite bring myself to say it aloud. Do you think it's connected to the disappearances?" Lena's voice was barely a whisper now, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in her hand. The disappearances. A dark, unspoken shadow that had hung over the Blackwood Mire for decades. Hikers, hunters, even a couple of local trappers gone without a trace. Dismissed as getting lost or tragic accidents, but their bodies were never found. "Not one." "I don't know," I said again, the words feeling inadequate, utterly insufficient. "But if it is, whoever's doing this is getting brazen, reckless." Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on the dense tree line. "I've heard stories, you know. Old rangers, folks who have lived here for generations. Talk of animals arranged in strange ways, ritualistic designs, always dismissed as rumors, old wives' tales." "Dismissed by people who haven't seen this," I muttered, my jaw tight. "No animal could have done that, not with that level of intent." She was silent, and I knew she agreed, but the question remained, gnawing at us both. If not an animal, then what? The thought chilled me more than the bone-deep cold we'd experienced at the site. The night air was sharp and clean as we finally reached the patrol truck, parked near the old access road. The engine rumbled to life with a welcome roar, a bastion of normalcy in a world suddenly turned on its head. Lena climbed in, her movements stiff, and we drove back to the ranger station in a heavy silence, each of us lost in the terrifying implications of what we'd witnessed. Our conversation that night, huddled around the worn table in the station's cramped kitchen, was fragmented, interspersed with long, uneasy silences. We picked at cold pizza, the grease staining our fingers, but the food offered no comfort. No matter how much we talked, how many theories we spun, one chilling fact remained. Whatever was out there in those woods, it was not natural. Not by any stretch of the imagination. The next morning, the bright light of dawn offered a fleeting moment of respite, a thin veneer of normalcy. But it was short-lived. We received a call from another patrol team a few kilometers away. Another site. Another spectacle. This time, reinforcements arrived in the form of Dr. Aris Thorne. My older brother, a renowned, if eccentric, cryptozoologist, a scholar of forgotten folklore and mythical creatures. He was a man of sharp intellect, deep-set eyes that always seemed to be looking beyond what was immediately visible, and a disheveled air that spoke of long nights spent poring over ancient texts. His presence here in the heart of Blackwood Mire wasn't a coincidence. I had called him. Desperation had finally overridden the years of strained silence between us. Eris had always been drawn to the shadows, to the things that logic struggled to explain. His work was often dismissed as fringe science, but faced with the impossible, he was the only one I could think of. He stood beside us at the new site, his lanky frame a stark silhouette against the dense canopy. His gaze swept over the scene, a slow, methodical study that seemed to take in every unnatural detail. This was no deer. This was a family of black bears, 3 of them, dismembered and arranged in a chilling spiral around a central, deeply disturbed patch of earth. Their claws, meticulously removed, were laid out like an offering. The smell was stronger here, the cold more pervasive. "Interesting," Eris finally murmured, his voice a low rumble. He adjusted his glasses, pushing them up the bridge of his nose. "Interesting," Lena spluttered, her face pale. "Eris, this is a massacre. What do you think is going on?" He turned his deep-set eyes to Lena, then to me. "What I think, Lena, is that we are witnessing something profoundly deliberate. Most predators, even apex ones, are efficient. They kill for sustenance. The remains are typically scattered haphazard, messy. But this," he gestured to the spiral of mangled bear parts, "this suggests intent, design." He knelt, his fingers lightly tracing a pattern in the churned earth. "It's almost surgical. The removal of the claws, the placement of the bones." He pointed to a small, glistening pool of dark liquid near the center of the spiral. "And this, it's not just blood. There's something else here." He uncapped a small vial, dipping a glass rod into the dark liquid, then raising it to his nose. He sniffed, a deep, contemplative inhale. "Ah, yes, the signature, that distinct chill, and the underlying metallic tang. A very specific energetic footprint, if you will." I exchanged a glance with Lena. He was already speaking in his cryptic, theoretical way. "Energetic footprint, Eris. What are we dealing with here?" He looked up, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "I can't say for certain, not yet, but I've encountered accounts of similar phenomena in my research. Indigenous folklore speaks of entities that don't merely kill but create. They arrange. They communicate." He paused, his gaze sweeping the trees around us. "And they are always accompanied by this cold, this unnatural stillness." Lena opened her mouth to argue, to bring him back to scientific reality, but he held up a hand. "No, Lena, look closely. These bears, they're picked clean, no meat, no gristle, as if they were prepared, cleaned, not consumed. Whatever did this, it doesn't feed on flesh in the conventional sense." The thought was more disturbing than the carnage itself. If it wasn't hunting for food, then what was its purpose? We spent the next few hours working methodically, collecting samples of everything: soil, bone fragments, hair, the strange liquid. Lena's movements were precise, her scientific training overriding her fear, but her face remained ashen. My hands, too, trembled as I bagged each piece of bone. The air itself felt charged, heavy with an unseen presence. As dusk began to bleed into the forest, painting the sky in somber hues of purple and gray, the tension reached a fever pitch. The trees seemed to lean in, their rustling leaves like hushed whispers, a symphony of unspoken dread. "All right," I finally declared, my voice rough. "That's enough. Let's get back to the station." We hurried, the 3 of us, through the fading light, the silence of the forest pressing in. Back at the station, Eris looked at me, his deep-set eyes unnervingly calm. "Elias, I'm inclined to agree with your initial assessment. This is not the work of any known animal. It's something else. Something entirely different." He sighed, looking down at his laden sampling kits. "These specimens might tell us something, but I suspect the answers won't be found under a microscope." We spent hours that night, long after Lena had gone to her bunk, hunched over the old, grainy monitors, reviewing the trail camera footage from the previous nights. For days, the cameras had yielded nothing but static shots of the dark, empty forest, an endless monotony of tree trunks and rustling leaves. I was beginning to think our efforts were futile, a desperate grasp at straws. Then on one particularly quiet night's recording, there it was, an anomaly. Near an old bear den recently vacated. A fresh kill site, a deer carcass left by hunters partially scavenged. And in the periphery of the frame, near the dense tree line, a blur, a massive, indistinct shape. It stood, utterly still for what felt like an eternity, simply observing. Not moving towards the carcass, not reacting to the sounds of the forest. Just watching. Its size was substantial, daunting. The profile, too unclear to provide concrete identification, left an unsettling void where my logical explanations usually resided. "What is that?" Lena whispered, materializing beside me. She had been on a different monitor, reviewing another camera's footage, but my sudden sharp intake of breath must have caught her attention. I shook my head, my throat suddenly dry. "I don't know." We stared at the screen, a low-resolution image taken in near-total darkness, hoping it would somehow offer more answers than it did. "It's big," she said, the understatement hanging heavy in the air. "That much is obvious," I muttered, my gaze fixed on the screen. "But what is it?" "A person." Lena considered it for a moment, then shook her head slowly. "No, not unless they're wearing some kind of massive, shapeless suit, or carrying something immense." I nodded slowly, a cold dread seeping into my bones. No, it wasn't human, not by any standard, and that was a truly chilling thought. "What else could it be?" I asked, a desperate hope for a rational answer in my voice. She only shook her head again, her eyes wide, her face a pale canvas of fear. I don't know, a bear, but it's standing upright. Bears don't stand like that for so long, so still." A shared thought, unspoken, hung between us, a word that felt too preposterous to utter. Lena's lips formed the shape of it. "Sasquatch." I let out a hollow, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, maybe." Neither of us believed it. Bigfoot, Yeti, they were mythical creatures, campfire stories. This felt different, more ancient, more malevolent. The blurred figure remained motionless for nearly 20 minutes, a silent sentinel, before turning with an unsettling smoothness and stepping back into the dense undergrowth, vanishing as completely as if it had been a trick of the light. The entire scene played out like a low-budget horror film, the kind where you want to scream at the characters to run, to do anything but stand there, staring into the abyss. "You see why I came back here tonight, Lena?" I asked, my voice raw. "To check these cameras one last time," she nodded, her silence more eloquent than any words. "What are we going to do?" "We report it," I said, though I knew how it would sound, how impossible it would be to explain, but it was all we had. This grainy, impossible image was the first thread in a terrifying tapestry. After a restless night, haunted by the memory of the image on the screen, I rose feeling heavy-limbed and disoriented. It took a moment for the reality of my surroundings to click into place. The ranger station, the thick forest outside, the events of the previous night. It hadn't been a dream. That distant, rhythmic thumping I'd heard in the deep hours of the night, a sound like a heavy, uneven gait, accompanied by a faint, almost human cry of distress. It had been real. I pushed the unsettling memory away. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in soft, bruised hues. Lena's voice, muffled through the closed door of my bunk, jolted me fully awake. "You ready?" "Yeah," I replied, pulling on my boots. I opened the door, stepping out into the cool, pine-scented air. "Let's do this." We geared up quickly, the air thick with unspoken apprehension. Today, we knew we weren't just patrolling. We were investigating. We headed directly for the newest carcass site reported by one of the other teams. The radio crackled with Chief Warden Silas Blackwood's voice, giving us the coordinates. Silas was a man of regulations and order, a stickler for protocol, and already I could feel his thinly veiled exasperation bleeding through the airwaves. He hated anything that disrupted the calm veneer of his reserve. When we reached the site, my stomach churned and even Lena gasped, a small, choked sound escaping her lips. This was worse. Far worse than the deer, worse than the bears. This was a young elk, larger than any raccoon, any bear. And it hadn't just been dismembered. It had been shredded. The ground was slick with enormous pools of dark, clotted blood. Its legs were torn away, looking like splintered kindling. Its entrails were strung through the lower branches of a sapling, a macabre garland. Jesus, Lena breathed, her hand clamped over her mouth, her face bone-white. What could do this? Same thing that got the others, I said, my voice grim, devoid of emotion. The sheer brutality of the scene was overwhelming. This wasn't merely a kill. This was an act of something. Aris arrived shortly after, his face etched with a fresh horror I hadn't seen before. Even his academic detachment seemed to waver. If he was meant to provide comfort or reassurance, he was failing spectacularly. I don't know what we're dealing with here, he admitted, his voice strained as he surveyed the carnage. It's possible we've stumbled upon an undiscovered apex predator. But if so, it would have to be something of unimaginable size and power, something that dwarfs anything in the known catalog of life. I nodded slowly, a part of me desperately clinging to the scientific explanation, even as the cold, acrid smell and the precise brutality argued otherwise. There were no monsters, just undiscovered species. Right, but deep down, a primitive part of me screamed that this was wrong, profoundly, fundamentally wrong. Another possibility, Aris continued, his voice regaining some of its academic cadence, is a mutation. Environmental factors, perhaps, pollution, radiation, something that warped an existing species into this. It was a desperate theory, a scientific rationalization for the utterly irrational. Lena, ever the pragmatist, pointed out the obvious. But where are the tracks, the struggle? There's no sign of a conventional attack, just this. Aris frowned, his eyes scanning the surrounding earth. Precisely. And the manner of the kill, the sheer destructive force, yet the almost sterile absence of typical predatory signs. No drag marks, no signs of feeding, beyond the initial dismemberment. It's like it tore the creature apart for sport, for display. He paused, then looked at me, a strange light in his eyes. Or it could be something else entirely, something we can't even begin to understand. Not yet. I looked at him, startled, wondering how he could have known my own unsettling thoughts. But he wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the distant tree line, a faraway look in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Lena asked, her voice tight with a desperate curiosity. Aris blinked, his eyes snapping back into focus, a practiced, almost dismissive smile appearing on his face. "Oh, nothing, just thinking out loud. The complexities of ecological anomalies, you know." But I knew he was lying. His casual dismissal was too forced, too immediate. He'd been saying things like that more and more lately, things that made my stomach clench, things that pushed at the boundaries of what I believed to be possible. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just another animal. And the footprints, enormous and strangely formed, pressed into the damp earth nearby, confirmed one thing. Whatever killed this elk was impossibly large. Much bigger than I'd even begun to imagine. Leaving the gruesome scene behind, that pervasive, sickening chill clung to us, seeping into our bones. The forest, once a comfort, now felt hostile, oppressive. The canopy of leaves overhead seemed to press down, plunging us into a perpetual twilight. The air grew colder, each breath fogging visibly. My spine crawled with an icy dread. The harmony of nature, the familiar symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves, had been replaced by a profound, suffocating silence. The air itself was a tangible tension, thick and suffocating. Lena looked at me, her eyes wide, reflecting a silent terror. Aris walked beside us, lost in thought, his face pale beneath his graying beard. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth, sent a jolt of pure anxiety through my system. We were no longer simply rangers patrolling our territory. We were trespassers in a place that had become deeply, terrifyingly wrong. That night, Aris insisted we return to the forest, not to the sights, but to a remote, rarely visited part of the reserve, known only through old, hand-drawn maps I'd inherited from my grandfather, another Thorn who'd spent his life in these woods. He spoke of ley lines and ancient energy fields, of indigenous lore and forgotten passages, his words weaving a complex, unsettling tapestry of belief and theory. Lena, ever the scientist, bristled at his pronouncements, trying to ground him in the observable, the quantifiable. "Eris, with all due respect," she started, her voice strained. "While I appreciate the cultural context, we need to focus on what we know." He chuckled, a dry, almost brittle sound. "What we know, Lena, is often a very small subset of what is." The local Cree elders spoke of the Gahiniawa, a spirit that walks the hidden paths. They called it the Mire Strider. It's a creature of mimicry, of cold, of unnatural order. "Mimicry?" I asked, my blood running cold. That distant cry I'd heard in the night, the almost human sound. "Indeed," Eris affirmed, his eyes gleaming in the beam of his headlamp. "It learns, it adapts, it imitates." Just then, a sharp rustle in the underbrush, impossibly close. We froze, then another behind us, and another to our left, then right. It was circling us, playing. The sounds were deliberate, precise, like something stalking its prey, but with a terrifying intelligence. Then utter silence. We stood, rigid, listening for what felt like an eternity. "Nothing. Maybe we should go back," I managed, my throat suddenly constricted. Lena nodded, her breath catching in her throat. Even Eris, for all his academic bravado, seemed to deflate, a strange look of awe and terror on his face. He turned, starting back towards the station, his powerful flashlight beam bobbing frantically. We followed, scrambling over roots and through dense thickets, a primal urge to flee driving us forward. The walk back felt interminable, a suffocating maze of shadows. Every creak of the trees, every hoot of an owl, seemed magnified, distorted, imbued with sinister intent. I fought the urge to break into a blind, panicked run, and then I saw it. A brief, fleeting glimpse, barely half a second, but it etched itself into my mind with horrifying clarity. Ahead, nestled between two massive, ancient birches, a figure, towering, 7 feet, perhaps more, covered in fur that shimmered like tarnished silver in the faint moonlight. Its form was unmistakably simian, ape-like, but it was far larger, more powerfully built than any gorilla known to science. Its arms hung low, almost to its knees. As it shifted, moving with an impossible fluidity between the trees, I caught another glimpse. Its face. Not quite human, not quite ape. A flat, almost featureless expanse, but its eyes glowed with an eerie, phosphorescent green, piercing the darkness, burning into mine with an intelligence that stole my breath. And then it was gone, vanished. "Did you see that?" Lena choked, waving her flashlight beam wildly through the underbrush where it had been. "I did," Eris whispered from behind us, his voice laced with a profound, terrifying awe. His mouth was agape, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the creature had stood. We stood there, rooted to the spot, expecting it to charge, to materialize again, to finish whatever horrifying game it was playing. But there was only silence. The forest was dead, utterly devoid of sound. "We need to get back to the station." "Now," I said, my voice barely a croak. Lena nodded frantically. Eris, still in a daze, turned and began to jog back towards the station, his flashlight a frenetic beacon. We followed, a desperate, silent retreat. The walk back felt impossibly long, an endless, terrifying gauntlet. My entire body screamed at me to run, to sprint blindly through the trees like a frightened child. But I forced myself to match Eris's pace, Lena clinging to my arm finally, the faint glow of the ranger station through the trees, a beacon of safety. As we burst through the door, a wave of profound cold washed over me, despite the relative warmth outside. Goosebumps erupted across my skin, and my breath plumed visibly, white clouds in the station's interior. It was a cold that seemed to come from within the very marrow of my bones, a deep, penetrating chill that slowly receded as we moved deeper into the building, away from the door. The door swung shut with a heavy thud, sealing us inside. We stood there, chests heaving as if we'd just run a marathon. What was that thing? I finally gasped, my voice raw. Did you both see it? Lena nodded, her face still pale with shock. Aris, however, shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. I'm not sure, Elias. I saw something, but I can't reconcile it with anything I've ever documented. Not definitively. Whatever it is, Lena said, her voice shaking, it's not natural, that much I know. Her striking hazel eyes, usually so bright with intelligence, seemed to gleam with unshed tears, reflecting the dim light of the room's silence fell again, thick and heavy like a physical presence. We need to check the cameras. Lena finally broke the silence. Maybe we caught something clear. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. Aris hesitated for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. Yes, let's do that. We moved to the monitor station, Lena immediately pulling up the footage. Hours of empty forest scrolled by, the monotony amplifying our dread. Then, last night's recordings. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw myself, Lena, and Aris walk out onto the porch, our headlamps piercing the gloom. And then it was there, the creature, this time on all fours. Its movements were fluid, silent, predatory, like a great cat or a wolf, but impossibly large, too large. And its gait, even on all fours, was subtly wrong, a chilling hint of the bipedal horror we'd seen just moments ago. Go back, I yelled, as Lena instinctively tried to fast forward. She did, rewinding slightly, and we watched it again. Closer this time, partially obscured by the trees but visible enough to confirm the terrifying anomaly. It moved with an unnatural grace, its bulk melting into the shadows. What the hell is that thing? I demanded, my voice trembling. Lena and Aris were silent, transfixed. From this angle it almost looked like a massive, gaunt dog or wolf. But the way it moved, the underlying intelligence in its posture. It's not any animal I've ever seen, Lena whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. Aris was quiet for a long moment, then spoke, his voice unusually soft, almost reverent. I've heard stories, Elias. Legends whispered by the elders of the Wabanaki who called this land home long before us. They speak of the Chenu, a spirit twisted by ice and hunger, a being that consumes not just flesh, but life force, the very essence of warmth and hope. It's said to be a mimic, capable of luring prey by imitating voices, even loved ones, a spirit that delights in the unraveling of the mind. My blood ran cold, the rhythmic thumping, the almost human cry of distress, the whispers in the undergrowth. But these are ancient stories, folklore, Aris, Lena countered, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Except we have video evidence right here, I pointed out, gesturing to the screen, where our own tiny, vulnerable figures were heading out into the ominous darkness. Aris nodded slowly. True, but it's still not enough to truly know what it is, or what it wants. We spent another hour watching the eerie, silent footage, the empty forest around us seeming even more ominous in the wake of the creature's brief, terrifying appearance. Finally, Lena stood, stretching. Let's see what else we can find tomorrow. I don't know about you two, but I need some sleep. Aris and I nodded, exhaustion weighing heavily on us. The adrenaline had drained, leaving behind a gnawing emptiness. Yeah, you're right. Get some rest. The next day began like any other, or so we desperately tried to tell ourselves. Lena and I were out on patrol, the forest initially calm, the morning breeze rustling through the leaves overhead, the light dappling the forest floor. At first, nothing. Just the familiar serenity. But then we started to notice it. A smell on the wind. Faint at first, a metallic tang, then growing stronger as we pushed deeper into the woods. It was the same rancid, sickly sweet odor of decay, of something long dead, mixed with that acrid, unsettling chemical note. It made my stomach lurch. Jesus, Lena muttered, her hand clamping over her nose. What is that? A dead moose? I shook my head, my senses on high alert. We kept moving, drawn by the foul beacon, until finally we found it. Or rather, what remained. A massive bull moose. Its enormous body, once regal and powerful, was now a grotesque ruin. It had been shredded, its hide peeled back in strips, its limbs splayed at unnatural angles. Blood had pooled and congealed in the damp earth. Most of its body was missing, or torn beyond recognition. The bones were impossibly clean, picked to the marrow in places, while others still held wisps of flesh, clinging stubbornly, unnaturally. Tufts of coarse hair, not from the moose but something else, something dark and matted, clung to the thorny undergrowth nearby. "Holy," Lena whispered, stopping dead in her tracks beside me. There were no tracks around it, no sign of any other animal. Nothing but the deeply gouged earth where the moose had thrashed, briefly, before whatever had assailed it was done. "Whatever did this was big," I said, my voice low and serious as I crouched beside the carcass. "But not a bear. Look at these claw marks." I pointed to deep, symmetrical gouges in a nearby tree trunk, almost perfectly parallel, impossibly long. Lena knelt beside me, her eyes tracing the marks. "You think that thing? It's hard to say for sure," I admitted. "But these marks, they're not like anything I've ever seen. They're too precise, too deliberate." Then we heard it, clear as a bell, yet profoundly mysterious. A sound that stole the air from my lungs, raising every hair on my body. It was a guttural, wet growl, impossibly deep, followed by a series of sharp, rhythmic clicks, like bones cracking together. And then a sound that twisted my gut into knots, a high-pitched, sobbing wail, distinctly, terrifyingly human. It echoed through the trees, mournful and desperate, a sound of pure agony. My blood ran cold. The noise seemed to emanate from all around us, shifting, oscillating, making its source impossible to pinpoint. It was not the call of any known animal, and yet the wail, it was too close to human for comfort. What is that?" Lena whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely a thread. I spun around, scanning the dense foliage, trying to locate the source to assess the threat. The growl came again, closer, then the clicking, then the wail, this time from directly behind me. I spun again, but there was nothing. Only the cold, the smell, and the crushing silence. "What the hell?" Lena breathed. And then the sound erupted again, directly in front of us, then instantly shifted to our right, then our left. It was playing with us, taunting us. Its speed, its ability to mask its presence, its deliberate manipulation of sound, it was utterly terrifying. "Come on," I yelled, grabbing Lena's arm, not thinking, just reacting. We bolted, back the way we came, tripping over roots, scrambling over fallen logs, propelled by a primal, desperate need to escape. Whatever this thing was, it defied every natural law I understood. We put as much distance as we could between us and that chilling symphony of growls, clicks, and human wails. But even as we fled, the sounds reverberated in my mind, an awful, relentless echo. What was it? What could produce such a terrifying chorus? It was like finding a venomous spider in your cereal box after you've taken a few bites. An insidious, unsettling undercurrent that made every shadow a potential threat. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, studied, evaluated by something just beyond the edge of my vision. Lena felt it too, her grip on my arm vice-like, her head swiveling, her eyes darting through the trees. Back at the ranger station, our faces pale, our bodies trembling, Lena and I exchanged a silent, haunted look. That sound, that impossible sound, coupled with the brutal, ritualistic carnage, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. A cryptid, an unknown creature, something that shouldn't exist but did. The thought scared me to my core, not just for us but for the reserve. This was our home, our responsibility. If something this dangerous was out there, capable of such brutal acts, what else could it do? Who else could fall into its path? "All right," Lena said, her voice shaking but resolute. "We need to go deeper. We need to find this thing." I nodded, a grim determination settling in my chest. If it was our job to protect this wilderness, then we had to face its darkest secret. Our preparations were fueled by a volatile cocktail of apprehension and grim resolve. Outside the station, the ancient trees stood like dark, watchful sentinels against the fading sunlight, their colossal forms adding to the suffocating sense of dread. This forest, once my solace, now felt like a living, breathing entity, its ancient heart beating with something monstrous. We packed only essentials: extra food, water, powerful flashlights with fresh batteries, and our knives, securely sheathed on our belts. Nothing to weigh us down, nothing to impede an escape, but enough to survive a night if necessary. It felt less like preparing for a patrol, and more like arming ourselves for battle. Dusk had fully settled, cloaking the forest in inky blackness, when we finally stepped back into the silent woods, the glowing face of my watch showing just past 9 o'clock p.m. The chirping chorus of crickets was strangely muted, almost hesitant, as if even they sensed the shift in the air. The air itself was colder, the smell stronger. We moved slowly, cautiously, our flashlights cutting narrow beams through the oppressive gloom. We'd hiked for nearly an hour, pushing deep into the forest's densest core, where the ancient foliage choked out even the moonlight. And then we found it. It was colossal, gigantic. I don't know how else to describe it. It was unlike anything in any textbook, any folklore, any nightmare. It stood, motionless, framed by the towering trunks of ancient pines, its head slightly cocked, its glowing eyes fixed on us. They burned with an impossible luminescence, twin orbs of greenish-gold light, piercing the absolute darkness. And they held an intelligence that turned my blood to ice. It didn't attack. Not immediately. That was the most terrifying part. Instead, it simply studied us, its gaze unblinking, analytical, utterly devoid of emotion. It held us in its terrible scrutiny for what felt like an eternity. Then, with an almost imperceptible shift of its massive form, it melted back into the shadows, disappearing as silently and completely as if it had been a hallucination. I wanted to chase it, to pursue. But Lena's grip on my arm was like a vice, her fingers digging into my flesh, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and profound disbelief. "No, Elias, don't." We stood there for long minutes, breathing raggedly, our hearts pounding against our ribs like trapped drums. The cold, the smell, the silence, they were all magnified now, a suffocating presence. Finally, Lena released me, taking a shaky step back, putting a small distance between us. Are you all right?" she whispered, her voice raw. "That thing, I've never seen anything like it." I nodded, still unable to speak, the image of those burning, intelligent eyes seared into my mind. "I'm okay," I finally managed, the words a strained rasp. "But what are we going to do? We can't just ignore this." She nodded, her face grim. "You're right, we can't." She took another step towards me, placing a hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "We have to get help, Elias. We have to." It was the first time I'd ever heard her admit such a need, and it grounded me, even as the terror threatened to consume me. "Okay," I said, finding a new, desperate resolve. "Let's go back to the station." We call Eris again. Once back at the ranger station, our minds buzzed with the impossible encounter. We reviewed every single detail, dissecting each movement, each sound, each terrifying nuance. The more we talked, the more I began to wonder if my mind was playing tricks on me, if the sheer terror of the moment had warped my perception. But Lena had seen it too. That was the anchor. We replayed the trail cam footage, watching our own reactions, our desperate flight. It was all there. A creature beyond comprehension. I threw myself into research, poring over old books on local history, forgotten legends, indigenous accounts. I scrolled through obscure online forums, desperate for any shred of information. Most of it was sensationalized nonsense, wild tales of Bigfoot or paranormal hoaxes. But some of it resonated with Eris's words. Accounts of large, upright creatures, not always aggressive, but always accompanied by an unnatural cold, by strange sounds, by an unsettling silence. A creature of mimicry. Lena suggested we rest during daylight hours, as the entity seemed most active at night. We tried, but sleep was a fleeting, tormented thing. A few hours later, in the pre-dawn gloom, I saw it again. The creature. It appeared at the very edge of the forest, its glowing eyes twin beacons in the deepening twilight. It stood motionless, watching Lena and me through the window of the ranger station. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, observing. For what felt like endless hours, it maintained its terrible vigil, its gaze unblinking, unnervingly intelligent. And then, as the first bruised streaks of dawn appeared on the horizon, it vanished. Gone, as if it had never been. Lena and I were silent for a long time after that, but we didn't need to speak. The terrifying realization settled over us, heavy and cold as a tombstone. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't merely observing us. It was warning us. Or perhaps it was learning. I pulled up a chair and sat, my mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Lena did the same, her eyes wide, still fixed on the empty spot in the forest where the creature had stood. We had spent hours, days, poring over books, scouring the internet, calling every contact we had, desperate for answers. All we had was a growing list of terrifying possibilities, none of them comforting. In a last, desperate attempt, I decided to call Eris again. This time there was no hesitation. I knew his theories, his strange beliefs, and now I was ready to listen. I put my phone on speaker so Lena could hear. "Eris," I said, my voice hoarse, "it's me, Elias." We saw it again. There was a long silence on the other end. "I know," he finally said, his voice strangely calm. "It showed itself to you clearly, didn't it? Its eyes, the cold, the silence." My blood froze. How did you know?" "Because it does that," he replied, his voice a low, academic rumble. "It reveals itself when it deems you ready, when it wants to be seen. It's part of the process." "Process?" Lena interjected, her voice sharp with a sudden new fear. "What process?" "The Chenu is not merely a cryptid, Lena," Eris explained, his words slow, deliberate. "It's a manifestation, a spirit tied to the ancient, hungry heart of the Mire. It does not simply kill for sustenance. It kills to create, to communicate. The arrangements of the bones, the flayed hides, they are not random acts of savagery. They are messages, warnings, or invitations." He paused, and the silence on the line stretched, taut with unspoken dread. The indigenous legends speak of it being drawn to disturbances, to intrusions, but also to a certain kind of energy. A lineage, perhaps, a sensitivity. "Elias, tell me, does the cold feel familiar to you?" My breath hitched. The cold, the bone-deep chill that had followed us since the first carcass. It did. It felt strangely familiar, like an echo from a half-forgotten dream. I remembered stories my grandfather used to tell, old tales of the Mire, of strange happenings, of his own inexplicable experiences with the cold, the silence, the feeling of being watched. He'd always dismissed them as the ramblings of an old man, but now, Elias, Eris's voice cut through my thoughts, gentle but insistent. "Yes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, it does." "That's what I feared," Eris sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "The Chenu isn't just attracted to the Mire, it's bound to it, and the legends say it can be drawn to certain bloodlines, to those who share an ancient connection to this land, to the thorns." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as winter air. "My family, my bloodline, connected to this thing. It's not just a warning, Elias," Eris continued, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible murmur. "It's been watching your family for generations, drawn to your ancestors' deep roots here. It's been leaving these messages because it's not just a creature hunting. It's a being asserting its claim. And now that you've come back, now that you've seen it, now that you've sought it out, it's decided you are ready for a different kind of communication." "What kind?" Lena managed, her voice strained with a terrified curiosity. "It knows you," Eris replied, his voice chillingly calm. "It knows your minds, your fears. It is learning. And soon it will speak directly, not with growls or wails or arranged bones, but in a language you will understand, a language designed to unravel you." A shudder ran through me, a profound, gut-wrenching dread. This wasn't just a monster. This was an ancient, intelligent entity tied to my very lineage, playing a terrifying game with my sanity. "What do we do?" I finally asked. The raw desperation in my voice evident. Eris was silent for a long moment. "You can't run, Elias, not from this. The Chenu feeds on the unraveling, on the fear. It thrives on the breaking of the mind. His voice softened. What you need to understand is that the mire, it has a spirit, and sometimes that spirit demands to be recognized, to be acknowledged. He didn't offer solutions, just grim, chilling insight. He offered only a terrifying clarity. And with that, he hung up left deflated by Eris's ominous words. Lena and I knew what we had to do. We didn't need his help to hunt it. We just needed to understand it. We shed our initial disappointment and allowed it to morph into a grim determination. We were forest rangers. We prided ourselves on our independence, our resourcefulness. We had a unique set of skills, an intimate knowledge of these woods. It was time to use them. We headed back into the forest, not with cameras and snares, but with a different kind of purpose. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows. The air was thick with that pervasive, cloying smell, and the cold was now a constant, an icy presence that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves. The forest, my sanctuary, had become a living, breathing nightmare. I snapped pictures of everything that felt even remotely wrong, anything that seemed out of place. There was a lot, too much. Lena walked beside me, her phone in hand, her eyes scanning the deepening shadows, her face a mask of resolute fear. We walked for hours, talking in hushed tones, discussing Eris's words, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. What kind of creature was this? And why us? Why now, as true darkness fell, wrapping around us like a heavy, suffocating blanket, the uneasy feeling returned, stronger than ever. It wasn't just danger I felt, but an unnerving curiosity emanating from the unseen. Something was watching us, dissecting our every move, observing our attempts to understand. I fought off the encroaching thoughts, the insidious whispers of paranoia, but they kept returning, stronger, more insistent each time. Finally, Lena turned, her face pale in the dim light. She had been walking a few paces ahead, leading the way. "I think we should head back, Elias," she whispered, her voice unsteady, confirming my own spiraling thoughts. "Yeah," I admitted, my heart pounding in my chest. I was just about to say the same thing. We turned, heading back towards the station. The forest was utterly silent now, save for the crunch of our boots on the frozen earth. Every so often, a rustle in the bushes would make me jump, my headlamp flashing frantically into the darkness, but each time it was nothing. Just a deer. Or so I desperately tried to convince myself. We saw no more carcasses on the way back, but the feeling of being watched, of being followed, was omnipresent. It clung to us like the cold, like the smell. In the following days, our routine became a ritual of dread. Our day jobs morphed into a terrifying hunt, a cat-and-mouse game with an unseen, intelligent predator. I began setting up traps in the areas where the creature had been seen, carefully camouflaging them. The forest, normally serene, now crackled with a malevolent energy, as if it too was watching my efforts. My mind was a constant kaleidoscope of anticipation and dread, a swirling vortex of questions. Had we bitten off more than we could chew? The next few days blurred into a sleepless haze. We spent every waking hour in the woods, setting up cameras and snares, trying to anticipate its movements. We even enlisted the help of some of the newer rangers, though we offered only vague explanations, careful not to reveal the true horror of what we were facing. The creature's movements initially seemed random, a chaotic wandering through its territory. But as I studied the tracks, the patterns, the chilling logic began to emerge. It wasn't random at all. It was patrolling with a chilling precision, covering vast swathes of the mire, appearing at specific points with unnerving regularity. I made meticulous notes, trying to predict its next move, and Lena and I set up our cameras and snares along these calculated routes. We didn't want to kill it if possible, just capture it, get definitive proof, so others would believe, so we could understand, but days bled into nights and my optimism withered. Each morning, checking the cameras yielded nothing but empty shots, or the mundane images of deer grazing, oblivious to the monstrous intelligence that stalked their world. Eventually I stopped checking. There was no point. "What do you think?" Lena asked one night, leaning over my shoulder as I fiddled with a recalcitrant camera trap. "You think I'm a terrible photographer." I managed a weak smile. "You're worse than me, Lena, and that's saying something." I sighed, rubbing my eyes. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me still wants to believe this is some elaborate hoax, an urban legend come to life. But then I remember its eyes. The cold, the sound." Lena nodded slowly, biting her lip. "If we could just get some evidence, anything, something undeniable, we could convince Chief Blackwood to bring in proper experts. Cryptozoologists or whatever they're called." I liked the sound of that. Real help. People who understood the impossible. "We'll keep trying for a few more days," Lena said, reading my mind. "But if nothing happens by Friday night, we pack it in. We need to rest, to regroup. We can't fight this if we're running on fumes." I agreed wholeheartedly. So we pressed on, fueled by stale coffee and a desperate hope. On a cold, windless evening, as the sun's last rays bled into the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows, Lena and I positioned ourselves in a hidden location near the site of the most recent carcass. The forest was still, the usual nocturnal chorus replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. We'd been out here for hours, exhaustion gnawing at our edges, but we couldn't give up. We had to catch it, or at least get a clear visual. My eyelids drooped heavy, but I forced them open, fighting the encroaching sleep. The darkness was absolute now, pressing down, suffocating. Just as I was about to call it a night, the creature appeared. It was silent. Fast, gliding in through the trees like a shadow given form. I caught a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye, a massive, shifting bulk moving with impossible speed from one tree to another. It seemed utterly unbothered by the elaborate traps we had laid, large steel bear traps, smaller snares, tripwires. It sidestepped them all effortlessly, without even a glance, as if it knew exactly where they were, as if they were nothing more than minor inconveniences. It flowed through our perimeter without setting off a single one, until finally it disappeared into the deeper darkness. Then its sounds began. Low, guttural growls that vibrated through the earth, followed by those sharp, rhythmic clicks like cracking bones. And then the high-pitched, mournful wails, distinctly, terrifyingly human, echoing through the woods, almost mocking us. What is that thing?" Lena whispered, her voice raw with terror after several minutes had passed and the sound subsided, replaced by a profound, ringing silence. I shook my head, my mind reeling. "We are definitely not dealing with an animal here, Lena," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is something else entirely. Something more." Fear, cold and absolute, crept into both our hearts. The realization hit us, a crushing weight. We weren't hunting this thing. It was hunting us. The decision to retreat to the ranger station was unanimous, unspoken. We were hopelessly outmatched. 2 rifles against an intelligent, ancient horror. While Lena and I moved quickly under the cover of the dim moonlight, our minds reeled, grappling with the true predator-prey dynamic that had been revealed. We were no longer the hunters. We were the hunted. The creature didn't make it easy. It followed. It stayed a few 100 feet behind us, never getting too close, always remaining just beyond the edge of our vision, a whisper on the wind. The sound of its movements through the trees was subtle, insidious. A rustle of leaves that was just too deliberate, a crack of a twig that felt too heavy. As if sensing my thoughts, Lena looked back over her shoulder, a sharp gasp escaping her lips as she caught another fleeting glimpse of its immense form, melting into the shadows. She pointed, but she didn't need to. We both knew. And if either of us made even one wrong move, I shuddered, a primal fear seizing me. It's hard not to think about your own mortality when you're being stalked through the pitch-black woods by an entity capable of ripping you limb from limb. An entity that seems to be playing with you. The sounds from behind us stopped abruptly. I spun around, nearly tripping over my own feet. Nothing. Whatever had been following us had vanished. Lena looked at me, her wide eyes reflecting pure terror. "It can mask its presence," she whispered, her voice trembling completely. "Whenever it wants." My heart hammered in my chest, a desperate bird trying to escape its cage. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm myself, but it was impossible. My mind raced, consumed by dread. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached the ranger station. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking, and we stumbled inside. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I could still feel its eyes on me. The creature was at the edge of the forest now, closer than ever, its fierce, glowing eyes fixed on our flimsy wooden sanctuary. Suddenly, a loud, sickening thud outside. Both of us spun, staring through the narrow window beside the front door. Whatever had made the noise was already gone, vanished like smoke. My heart pounded as I looked down at what lay on the ground, directly on our doorstep. Another carcass, this one bigger than any we'd seen. A full-grown deer, its head torn clean off, its entrails spilled in a glistening crimson coil across our welcome mat. "Jesus Christ," Lena muttered, her voice choked. "It's sending us a message. A terrifying, intimate message." I thought back to my first day in the mire years ago, full of hope, of purpose, of the quiet majesty of the wilderness. Now all of it had curdled into a bitter, gnawing dread. Every night was spent huddled inside, all lights out, listening to it move outside, scratching at the walls, its low growls and heavy breathing right outside our windows. The faint sound of something clearing its throat just before it moved off. It wasn't bound by any laws of nature, any physics I understood. It was something else. And it was watching us always. Its eyes were on me even when they weren't there, like an itch you can't scratch, an irritation beneath your skin that never goes away. A constant, chilling reminder that you are utterly, hopelessly, relentlessly hunted. It was playing with us, taunting us with its proximity during the day, safe behind our flimsy walls. But at night, that's when the true horror began. It seemed to be just getting started. And that made me feel sick to my stomach, like I was standing on the edge of a bottomless cliff, the wind whispering my name, and nothing but air beneath my feet. Like at any moment, we would be pulled off into the abyss, never to be seen or heard from again. What was your favorite part of the story? Want more stories like this? Follow for more.